All right, let's jump right back into it, picking up exactly where we left off in part 1. So in our previous explainer, we went through the terrifying on-the-ground history of the Zodiac's crime spree back in the late 60s and early 70s. But for this second part of our deep dive, we're shifting gears. We're moving away from the physical attacks and stepping into the modern, maddening, and honestly profoundly terrifying hunt for a total phantom. I mean, for half a century, this case has simply refused to die. So over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to unpack exactly how a cold case has stayed incredibly hot in the minds of the public, armchair detectives, and federal investigators alike. Armed and extremely dangerous. Just hearing that quote pulled straight from the official source documents plunges us right into the grim reality of the FBI files. Back then, this warning was being blasted out to law enforcement with this absolute desperate urgency. But reading it today, it sets a really tense tone that contrasts so sharply with the passage of time. Because the uncomfortable truth we have to face is that despite decades of exhaustive investigation, millions of man-hours, and global media attention, a prolific serial killer almost certainly lived out the rest of his life as a completely free man. The warning went out, sure, but the ghost was already gone. You can literally still feel the raw, unpolished fear radiating off these official documents. The urgency is just palpable. Examination desired. They were begging the cryptoanalysis section to review the material immediately. The San Francisco Police Department was just frantically trying to figure out if there was any hidden lead in the killer's taunting messages before he struck again. And it was that desperate initial search that actually laid the groundwork for the 3 modern investigative paths we're going to explore today: DNA, cryptology, and the endless parade of suspects. Section 1, the cold case thaws, DNA technology. Okay, so as traditional detective work kind of hit a brick wall over the decades, science kept marching forward, offering this glimmer of hope that microscopic evidence might finally unmask the killer. But here's the massive question. Did the physical evidence actually survive the wait? According to forensic DNA expert Dr. Monte Miller, it all comes down to how the Zodiac's letters and envelopes, specifically the stamps he licked, were stored. If they were kept in optimal, air-conditioned, dark, refrigerated conditions, DNA might just be viable for 50 years. But if it was tossed in a probable storage scenario like a cardboard box in a warehouse going through decades of summer heat and freezing winter cycles, Dr. Miller's assessment is pretty chilling. You probably wouldn't get a single usable fragment off of it after 40 years. It is literally a race against the physical degradation of time. But let's say they do somehow recover a viable sample. What then? Well, the strategy relies on a massive modern breakthrough. Our sources highlight a major push in 2018 by the Vallejo police, submitting original letters to a private lab. Their ultimate goal is to extract a profile and use genetic genealogy. This is the exact same open-source database technique that finally caught Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. You take the DNA profile, upload it to public ancestry sites, find distant cousins, and painstakingly build a family tree backward to triangulate a suspect. It's brilliant. In fact, a former FBI assistant special agent noted that if a strong DNA profile is ever developed, law enforcement wouldn't hesitate to take drastic measures, even exhuming the bodies of deceased suspects to match those samples. Section 2, cracking the killer's ciphers. Shifting from biology to psychology, it becomes super clear that the Zodiac wasn't just a murderer. He was engaged in active, calculated psychological warfare. It was a sick game to him, and he wanted the whole world to play. Looking at the FBI's actual substitution system key reveals just how fiendishly complex this was. He didn't just use a simple one-to-one code, where A equals 1. He used a system with variants. That means common English letters had multiple alternating ciphertext symbols to deliberately confuse codebreakers. Of the 4 ciphers he mailed, only 2 have ever been definitively cracked. The first one was solved by an amateur couple back in 1969. The second? That wasn't cracked until a staggering 51 years later in 2020 by an international team using advanced software and supercomputers. Half of his codes are still a total mystery. And those unsolved codes? They created a really fascinating, though incredibly frustrating, byproduct. Take this FBI memo, which details an interview with a citizen who freely admitted to sending materials to an attorney, desperately trying to get a response from the actual Zodiac based on his own deciphering theories. The files are just packed with an endless, decades-long stream of amateur cryptonologists who are absolutely convinced they've broken the unsolved ciphers. It shows perfectly how the killer managed to infect the minds of the public, creating this legion of obsessed puzzle solvers who occasionally cross the line into actively interfering with federal investigations. Which brings us to Section 3, a parade of prime suspects. Because the case was never formally closed, independent investigators and true crime authors rushed in to fill the void, creating this terrifying, never-ending list of accused men. Let's just rapid-fire through some of the prime suspects. You have Arthur Leigh Allen, the famous focal point for decades. Police literally found him wearing a Zodiac brand watch, the exact logo the killer signed his letters with. Then there's Earl Van Best Jr., the subject of a massive book and documentary. More recently, independent groups pointed to Gary Francis' post, claiming his forehead scars perfectly matched the famous police sketch. Others focus on Paul Alfred Dorr because of his obsession with cryptography. And if you dig deep into the FBI files, you'll find extensive tracking of lesser-known figures, like a guy referred to simply as Kane. Every few years, a new name gets pushed to the front with a mountain of highly specific but entirely circumstantial evidence.
To really grasp how law enforcement processes this nonstop parade of suspects, you have to look at this eerie, heavily redacted FBI teletype about that suspect, Kane. The document notes he was born in 1924 and had a long history of offenses that just abruptly stopped in 1969, which is right around the exact time the Zodiac murders were peaking. It actively places him in the very locations where victims lived or died. This right here shows the grim, bureaucratic reality of tracking a ghost. Because for every public theory that grabs a headline, there are dozens of exhaustive, private investigations documented in these blacked-out federal files that ultimately lead to dead ends. And all this public obsession, it fuels a relentless, almost manic pace of modern breakthroughs. Let's track this timeline together. In 2020, an FX docuseries heavily claimed Earl Van Best Jr. was the killer, a narrative that independent investigators later totally dismantled. Then in 2021, an independent group called the Casebreakers confidently identified Gary Francis' post. That claim got so much press that the FBI actually had to publicly push back and state definitively that the case was still open. Fast forward to 2023, independent reports started claiming the FBI had secretly listed post all along. The federal authorities are basically forced to play defense constantly, burning valuable resources just batting away premature public declarations.
Section 4. The Industry of Obsession.
The friction between entertainment media and actual federal investigators is so intense, and it's given rise to a massive cottage industry of books, tours, and documentaries. We're looking at internal FBI emails regarding a History Channel documentary pitched specifically for the 50th anniversary of the killing spree. You can read the producers trying to coordinate with the FBI to discuss how national agencies support local police. It's a stark, really uncomfortable contrast, right? You have television executives trying to package a 50-year-old series of gruesome murders into a neat, highly rated miniseries, constantly colliding with the cold, unyielding reality of federal investigators who still consider this an active, open tragedy. And the interactions in these files get truly bizarre. Look at this request from Cargus 7 Productions. Television producers were literally submitting supposed cipher solutions, which were crafted by their own paid teams, directly to the FBI's cryptanalysis unit. They were asking the FBI to analyze their TV show solutions and begging for on-camera interviews with federal agents to validate them for the broadcast. The line between trying to solve a horrific string of crimes and simply producing a hit TV show becomes incredibly, dangerously blurred here. But the crazy thing is, this media circus is exactly what the killer wanted from day one. Listen to this unsettling excerpt from a citizen interview buried in the FBI files. This interviewee completely nailed the killer's psychological profile, saying he believed the Zodiac was actively taunting law enforcement, entirely confident they would never break his identity codes. This captures the exact diabolical mythos the killer set out to create. He didn't just want to kill innocent people, he wanted a captivated, terrified audience. And half a century later, the entertainment industry is absolutely still giving him one. Finally, Section 5. Will we ever know? Despite all the incredible advancements in DNA tech, the correct ciphers, and the never-ending parade of suspects, there's no neat Hollywood ending here. There's just this number, 37. It is absolutely vital to remember that while we obsess over documentaries and secret codes, there's a very real human cost. In 1974, the Zodiac mailed his final confirmed letter claiming to have murdered 37 people. While law enforcement officially connected him to 5 deaths and 2 injuries, that chilling claim of 37 victims remains this unverified hanging shadow over the entire case. So when we look back at the decades of wild suspects, the TV producers demanding FBI validation, the amateur code breakers losing sleep over 50-year-old letters, we really have to ask ourselves something deeply unsettling. Is the Zodiac's greatest victory not his physical crimes, but our endless, unyielding obsession? He wanted to permanently infect our collective consciousness. And looking at the sheer volume of evidence, theories, and media today, it's incredibly hard to argue that he didn't succeed. That wraps up our explainer on the modern hunt for the Zodiac. Keep questioning the evidence, and we'll see you in the next one.